Okay, so we have learned about what happens normally with glucose and fructose when they are metabolized in the liver. And now we want to talk about what happens when things go wrong, like they do in hereditary fructose intolerance. Okay, but first I do just want to quickly recap what we've learned so far. So when blood glucose is high, then in the liver, glucokinase is in the cytoplasm. Remember, glucokinase is the enzyme that will put a phosphate on glucose so that it will stay in the liver cell. And then that glucose 6-phosphate can be used to form glycogen, or it can be used in glycolysis and the citric acid cycle to make ATP or fatty acids. So that's what happens when blood glucose is high. When it's low, then our liver cells want to break down glycogen and get gluconeogenesis going. And so they end up forming quite a bit of glucose 6-phosphate. And the phosphate gets removed by this phosphatase to make glucose. So we're trying to generate lots of glucose to release out to the blood. And in order for that to be successful, we need to send glucokinase into the nucleus so that it doesn't put another phosphate on that glucose and put us in this futile cycle. Okay, so when blood glucose is low, our glucokinase is sent to the nucleus. Glycogen is broken down. That's called glycogenolysis. And glycolysis is reversed to gluconeogenesis, and that produces glucose that we can release into the blood. Okay, so that's what happens with glucose. And with fructose, remember, when fructose enters the liver, it's mainly metabolized in the liver, not by other cells very much. It is phosphorylated by fructokinase to make fructose 1-phosphate. And then fructose 1-phosphate is changed by our star enzyme, Aldolase B, into DHAP and glyceraldehyde. And that allows it to enter glycolysis to make ATP or to enter gluconeogenesis and eventually form glycogen for storage. So that's how it's used as energy. But fructose 1-phosphate also can be used as a signal in the liver cell. And the signal that it serves as is as a signal of high blood sugar. So it tells glucokinase to come out of the nucleus. Okay, so we have fructose 1-phosphate acting as a signal, and fructose, when it's used as energy, is entering glycolysis or gluconeogenesis. All right, so that's what happens when things are working well. What happens when things go wrong? Well, when aldolase B is deficient, so it's knocked out here, then it can no longer take its substrate, fructose 1-phosphate, and turn it into the products, DHAP and glyceraldehyde. That just doesn't happen anymore. But the fructose is still getting phosphorylated by fructokinase. So we're still making fructose 1-phosphate. And because it doesn't get turned into anything, the fructose 1-phosphate is building up. Okay, and so that means it's no longer getting used in glycolysis or in gluconeogenesis, and essentially fructose is no longer being used as energy by the liver cells. And that is kind of a bummer, but the really dangerous stuff is what we'll talk about next. So as might seem kind of obvious, the fructose 1-phosphate has a phosphate on it, okay, and phosphate is often abbreviated PI like this. Because this phosphate is stuck and it's not getting used in glycolysis or gluconeogenesis, but the fructokinase is still making fructose 1-phosphate, well, that phosphate gets stuck there, and our free phosphate pools in the cell start to go down because so much of it is getting used up by this fructose 1-phosphate, and it's not going anywhere. So our phosphate's getting depleted. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but why is that a big deal? Well, let's talk for just a minute about the electron transport chain. Do you remember this, the ETC? Well, our ATP synthase here is going to use our free phosphate to make ATP. So, because the electron transport chain requires phosphate to make ATP, if our phosphate pools are getting depleted, then the ability for the ETC to make ATP goes down. Okay, so our electron transport chain cannot work as efficiently. And what that means is that ATP production slows, and the liver cells are low on energy. And this is what leads to some of the liver damage, and if lots of fructose is consumed, eventually liver failure, is that these cells don't have the energy that they need to survive. Okay. And there's another problem as well with the fructose 1-phosphate buildup. So as this is building up, remember that fructose 1-phosphate acts as a signal. It acts as a signal of high blood sugar, and it tells the glucokinase to stay in the cytoplasm so it doesn't go to the nucleus. And that's what it does. The glucokinase stays around. And why is that a problem? Well, think about what normally happens when blood sugar is low. Normally, glucokinase goes to the nucleus, and the liver cell will kind of reverse things and get things going into gluconeogenesis, or it breaks down glycogen in order to produce lots of glucose to release, right? But when aldolase B is deficient and fructose 1-phosphate is building up, it serves as a signal and says, no, glucokinase, stay in the cytoplasm, just stay here. And so it does. And that means that whenever there's some glucose, it's going to phosphorylate it and make this glucose 6-phosphate. So, and when there's plenty of glucose 6-phosphate around, well, it kind of backs up the other systems. It backs up glycogen breakdown. So glycogen breakdown slows down. And it also backs up gluconeogenesis. So the gluconeogenesis is slowing down. And what that means is that not very much glucose is being produced. So the amount of glucose is going down. And that means that the amount of glucose that we can release into the blood is also going down. So if we have low blood sugar and the liver is not able to release glucose as it normally would to stabilize that blood sugar, well, we get hypoglycemia. And so a lot of the symptoms that are involved with hereditary fructose intolerance have to do with hypoglycemia, like the shaking and the irritability and lightheadedness and things like that, in addition to the liver problems that we talked about because of the phosphate. Okay, so that is hereditary fructose intolerance. Do you have questions? Please let us know. We would love to help.